This is a recording of the Progressive Era slide presentation. I will record each slide, and as I click through them, you can pause it to fill in the blanks on your fill in the blank sheets if you need to. Right? Slide number 1, the Agrarian Movement, 1870 to 1900. Agrarian means farmers and ranchers. All right, the Agrarian Movement, 1870 to 1900. Problems of the farmers. New farm machinery and the opening of the Great Plains led to overproduction. Increased farm production led to more crops per acre, but falling food prices. This is populist Mary E. Lease advised farmers to raise less corn and more hay. She also said, if any man has not enough to eat 3 times a day and another man has 25 million, that last man has something that belongs to the first. So she was a reformer, and she thought that there should be improvements in the financial situation for farmers. Right? Farmers had to ship goods to market, and they were at the mercy of railroad rates. If you remember from the Gilded Age, we talked about John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie and how they were in competition, and they raised rates wherever they wanted. Farmers were constantly in debt, and a poor harvest could throw them into chaos. The Grange Movement. The original goal was to reduce rural isolation, but it turned into a group that demanded economic and political reforms for farmers. It helped get the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 passed to regulate railroads. So it started out as like a club for farmers to get together because they were isolated on their farms, and it was like a social club, but it turned into a group that strove to get better conditions. And it led to the regulation of the railroad. If you remember from the last unit, it was the first time that, or one of the first times that government got involved in regulating business. The Populist Party. This was a national third party representing laborers, farmers, and industrial workers. They wanted to fix the problems of falling prices and currency shortages. So there wasn't enough money, and the Populist Party wanted to increase the money supply and to help laborers and farmers. Their platform, and a platform means like what they were going to campaign for, their promises that they were making as a political party. They supported William Jennings Bryan for president. He lost both of those elections. They wanted unlimited coinage of silver. They wanted the government to produce as much silver as they possibly could. Direct election of senators, term limits for the president, and secret ballots, immigration restrictions, and a graduated income tax. So the direct election of senators meant that the people could elect them rather than the governors of the state sending them there. They wanted presidents to only be able to serve 2 terms. At this time, that wasn't the law yet. Secret ballots, so nobody could know who you voted for. Restrictions on immigration, because they thought they would be protecting American jobs. And an income tax to help pay for the government cost. Right? In third party in American politics, we've never had a third party win as president, but they also help to educate voters on special issues that the major parties might not be talking about. They provide an outlet for grievances for minorities, for people who aren't going to get their voices heard, and they pressure major parties to adopt their ideas, kind of like Bernie Sanders in this last recent election that we had. All right. The Progressive Movement kind of goes along with the Populist Party. Okay. The Progressive Movement was 1900 to 1920. And their goals were they sought to correct political and economic injustices from industrialization, abuses of big business, and exploiting workers. Like Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller, they had all that money in the Gilded Age, but their workers were very poor. Like the Populists, they wanted to reform society. The roots of the Progressives. They were founded in the social gospel movement. It was spearheaded by Protestant clergymen, educated middle class. Clergymen are like preachers, priests. Protestants are preachers. It called on Christians to raise the challenge of helping their fellow man. The impact of progressives. They brought many social reforms at the city and state levels to make government more accountable to the people. In an initiative, now you need to know these three terms. These are all three very important terms: initiative, referendum, and recall. In an initiative, voters could put bills on the state legislature where they could vote on them, whether they wanted a bill to pass. A referendum, voters could compel legislators, or that's lawmakers, to put a bill on the ballot for approval. And a recall is when the elected officials could be removed from office because the voters didn't feel they were doing a very good job. They could say, hey, governor, we don't like what you're doing. And if they had enough votes, they could fire the governor and recall him. Those are three very important terms: initiative, referendum, and recall. You need to know all three of those. Okay? The impact of the progressives. All right? They made major reforms at the federal level. That's at the United States government level with the Pendleton Act. If you remember, we had that term last unit as well. It reduced political appointments, and it had job candidates had to pass an examination. So you couldn't just give somebody a job because you were elected into office. They had to actually pass an exam to prove that they were capable of doing the job before you could hire them for government work. All right? Social reformers. Jane Addams was the leader of the settlement house movement, and she created Hull House. She realized that there were all of these immigrants who came in. They didn't speak English. They couldn't find jobs. They didn't have child care for their children. So she created a whole series of homes that would help immigrants, teach them English, to help them take care of their children. So she was the leader of the settlement house movement. Hull House was the most famous of those. Okay, muckrakers. Muckrakers were a group of investigative reporters, writers, and social scientists. They worked to expose the abuses of industrial society and expose corruption that existed at all levels of government. This is a very famous picture. I'd be willing to bet you'll see that on the STAR test. This is supposed to be Teddy Roosevelt, and he is like raking up all the dirt out of that muck. And if you look at the words there, you see the word scandal and government, meat, because of the abuses in the meatpacking industry. But a muckraker was generally a reporter who dug up all of the dirt that in government and in industry. All right. The most famous of the muckrakers was Upton Sinclair. He wrote the book The Jungle that revealed the many abuses of the meatpacking industry. You should have watched that video on Friday, and we'll be doing a project about that later this week. Frank Norris wrote The Octopus, which depicted the stranglehold railroads had over farmers. Jacob Riis wrote How the Other Half Lives. He showed the poverty of urban areas in the United States. If you remember in our last unit, you saw the pictures of the people who lived in the tenements and the little poor children working in the factories. Those were all taken by Jacob Riis. There were also other reformers, and some of those are in your vocabulary. All right, now let's talk about the meat industry. All right, we're going to stop right there, and we will pick up our next recording, the next unit on the next recording.